Hey guys, Cody here with Mercury Rising Astrology. I wanted to go over the upcoming transit of Venus conjoining Saturn in the sign of Pisces. This is starting on the 18th of January, and I think this is an important transit because Venus can broadly represent what we value and where we find pleasure and joy and how we relate to and connect to other people and how we express ourselves in a way that's creative and artistic. And Saturn is kind of the planet of foundations, hard, cold reality, transitions and thresholds, limits, things that need to be eliminated or let go of so that we can move into a new phase with a more solid and more stable foundation. And so I wanted to kind of do a deep dive into this transit to explore those themes and what to expect. So first up, I want to kind of talk about the conjunction and what it means traditionally, because this is what symbolizes the beginning of a new cycle. And so if we understand the meaning of a conjunction and how they work, that'll give us a good foundation to understand why this moment is kind of so important in terms of seeding a new phase, especially in terms of Venus and Saturn being the planet of reaping what you sow. You want to make sure that what you sow is what you want to reap. And so with the conjunction, traditionally, it's a blending of energies. And according to the 2nd century astrologer Vedius Valens, it is an important defining planetary relationship and interaction. It's a moment where two planets come together, their energies blend, and they impart some of their energies onto each other. And this kind of establishes the relationship for the rest of the cycle until they meet again and the cycle starts over. It's a moment of renewal, of transformation. It's, according to 13th century astrologer Bonatti, it is the most potent aspect because there's a direct interaction between the planets. The planets are exactly in the same spot of the sky, where other aspectual relationships like the sextile, square, trine, and opposition are the planets can see each other from different geometrical points, but they're not at the same spot in the sky. And so the conjunction is particularly powerful because it is a direct interaction of those planetary archetypes. And that intensifies the qualities. It's a lot more powerful to interact with somebody or something in person, one-on-one, than it is over like a phone call or Zoom or seeing them from across the street. The one example that came to mind is like punching somebody. You can punch somebody across the street, but it's like, it's not gonna have any effect. But once you're right next to each other, if I punch somebody, it's like, it's gonna create a powerful impact. And not to be violent, maybe because Mars retrograde in Cancer, I kind of feel the fight metaphor. But essentially it's a blending and emerging of these energies that seed a new cycle. And in this moment, there is an opportunity for integration and initiation and developmental potential. Just like planting a seed or, conception, it's like something has occurred that has been initiated, but it lies like an acorn in potential. The acorn isn't quite yet an oak tree, but it contains all that the future oak tree will be within that acorn. That's kind of what a conjunction is. It's like those planetary energies are super compact and tight and interacting with each other. And over the course of the cycle, it's going to grow into an oak tree, so to speak. And so it has a latent, potent potentiality to it that's super cool and super powerful. And if we're able to work with that potentiality, we can lay a firm foundation so that the tree that grows, so to speak, is a tree that bears the fruit that we want to eat. Next, let's touch on some of the archetypal themes of the planet Venus. She's the faster moving planet, so she'll be the one that's making the aspect to Saturn. Broadly speaking, Venus represents love, relationships, beauty, aesthetics, pleasure, enjoyment, wealth and luxury, fertility and reproduction, artistic pursuits, social connections, that's romantic bonds and platonic bonds, peace and harmony, diplomacy, balance, values, worth. Because it rules creative and artistic things, it's art, adornment, fashion, dance, music, anything that beautifies or expresses a sensual creativity or a artistic kind of aesthetic. That's going to be Venus. Um, Life's comforts and sensual pleasures as well, because it's things that we find joy in and we find pleasurable and that brings us happiness. Venus brings together its cohesion, its harmony. It wants to bind together. It is any kind of social bond. It's the planet of love, obviously, but it's love in the kind of broader sense. It's platonic bonds, it's relationship bonds, it's marriage. It is love and romance as well, but it can also be like best friends. So it's a benefic planet, which means it usually brings good things, but it can also bring things like overindulgence or greed and lust or superficiality, like putting beauty over substance, being too emotionally and sensually connected to things and not thinking logically or rationally. So it's the good things in life, but sometimes, too much of a good thing is bad. So that's generally the themes of Venus. Pretty much a pleasurable, for the most part, planet. So let's get into some of the themes of Saturn. So Saturn is known as the greater malefic. Greater not meaning better than, but greater meaning more broad or more esoteric themes of hardships, right? So we have time and aging, we have limits and boundaries, we have hardship, responsibilities, duties, we have land and agriculture, like anything that we have to take care of and to cultivate over time in order to produce something of substance. Isolation and melancholy and distance. It's the most distant planet. Being the most distant planet to the ancients, it was the last planet that we could see with our visible eyes. They didn't know about, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto per se. So Saturn was kind of like the boundary keeper, and it's associated with things like thresholds and transitions and liminal spaces, the space in between. And it's traditionally associated with death and decay and loss. However, I'm not quite convinced that it's death in terms of finality. I think it's death in terms of death and dying is a space between realms. It is a threshold that we cross to another state of being. And so when we think of death in terms of Saturn, it's productive to think of, yes, death in terms of endings and something that has reached its limit or its time here, but that doesn't mean the end of its existence in the broader sense. It's just a transitioning state into something new and different. And because Saturn was the most distant planet, it was associated with being closest to the divine realm of the fixed stars. The fixed stars to the ancients were the stars that didn't move, and so they were more permanent and divine, whereas the planets were known as wanderers. They moved around. And so Saturn being the threshold to the divine, so going through this process of hardship and responsibilities and duties and obligations and facing our limits and our boundaries and really having this sense of persistence and endurance in life through the hardships and the challenges that we face, that's what brings us closer to the divine, because we are learning and growing and maturing and gaining wisdom through that process if done properly. Now, if we throw our hands up in the air and do a whole, woe is me thing, then yeah, it can lead to depression, melancholy, a feeling of having no exit or no escape, or feeling constrained and restricted. But ultimately, Saturn is about the karmic lessons and fate and how we deal with those and face those. Do we do that with integrity and with grit, or do we do it by giving in and being a victim? And because Saturn is the planet of the harvest and reaping what we sow, if you face it with integrity and courage, you're going to reap something a little bit different than if you were to face it with victimization and self-pity and, a kind of doom and gloom outlook. So to get an idea of what is being planted or seeded during this cycle, we'll take the themes of Venus that we discussed and the themes of Saturn that we discussed, and because it's the nature of a conjunction, my cat is deciding to visit. There she is. Say hey. Hey. Because it's the nature of a conjunction, we want to merge and blend the significations of each planet. So when we think of Venus conjunct Saturn, one of the themes that may come up is most simply, because it's a conjunction, a new cycle in relationships, since Venus rules relationships. And because Saturn is has this gravitas and this seriousness and this weightiness, this might mean that there's a new cycle in our relationships in terms of making something more serious, more grounded, or more committed. This may be an opportunity to clarify or formalize an existing relationship, or because some of the themes of Saturn is a limit or the end of something or a transition from something else. This could be the end of a relationship or the end of how certain ways about how you go about relating with other people or certain social connections that you have. Because Venus rules things like values, this could be a reevaluation of your values and what you find valuable. Because Saturn can represent things that endure or last, this could be a reevaluation of those values in terms of what has lasting importance for you. What is or isn't working in the terms of things that the resources that you use and the values that you're embodying. Especially personal and material values, are they in alignment with our long-term goals? Are they going to sustain us? Are they going to be a part of our plan that, when that oak tree grows, is our values going to bear fruit to something that we want to have, to enjoy, and to, that's productive and helpful for us? Venus representing love and, Saturn representing maturity or, hard lessons. This can be lessons in loves, especially emotional themes that require patience and compromise, or a navigation of challenges and obstacles and limits and delays that teach us about worth, how we value other people, what we value in other people, how that reflects what we value, and are people valuing us in ways that make us feel fulfilled and honored and respected, and are we respecting and honoring the values of other people? Because Venus rules things like arts and creativity, our creative endeavors may become more grounded, more practical, have a better plan. You could, involve yourself with creative pursuits or artistic pursuits that require discipline and focus in the daily kind of work in order to produce that art. Venus can represent our ideals because our values and, our ideals are intricately linked, and especially around love and beauty and social connections. We'll be faced with the cold, hard reality, is what we've built so far. That not only is this the beginning of a cycle, it's also the end of a cycle. So we're reaping what we've sown over the last Venus-Saturn cycle. What needs adjusted? What we've built, is reflective of what we valued. And so if we don't like what we built and we don't like where we're at, then we need to check in with what we've been valuing and see what adjustments need to be made and separate the wheat from the chaff, so to speak. How are we missing the mark, to adjust and make sure that the next cycle, when it comes back around, we are happy with what we've built. So as you can imagine, if the conjunction is a seed and the themes of Venus and the themes of Saturn are the nature of that seed, the soil in which that seed is planted is going to have a pretty profound effect on the nature and the expression of that plant. And in this particular case, the soil that the seed is being planted in is going to be the sign of Pisces and the house that Pisces rules for you in your chart. So I wanted to go over some of the themes of Pisces because this is kind of the nutrients or the material that the seed has to work with in order to express the themes that we've discussed. So Pisces is a double-bodied water sign, feminine, ruled by Jupiter. And so there's this emotional, spiritual, intuitive, transcendent, romantic, divine kind of essence to the sign of Pisces. There's qualities of imagination, idealism, dreaminess, and a connectivity to something beyond ourselves, particularly in the emotional realm. With Venus being there and Saturn being there, there's this need to ground our lofty ideals in reality and have compassion and devotion and forgiveness. With Saturn representing things like structure, there is a need to create boundaries in the boundless and also dissolve parts of our boundaries that are no longer serving us. This could be facing romantic illusions or fantasies. This will be asking us what is real, what is sustainable. We have these grand, dreamy fantasies and visions and illusions and sometimes delusions, but like what's real and what can stand the test of time? There's going to be a need to reconcile the Piscean vulnerability with the Saturnian accountability. You know, like if we're being vulnerable and honest with ourselves, it's hard sometimes to, you know, also be accountable because I don't like that. There's going to be a need to reconcile this Piscean, you know, sense of emotional vulnerability with accountability. Accountability can be hard if we're really emotionally sensitive because we've got to be real and we've got to be honest and we've got to take a hard look at reality. There's a finding of this balance between the Piscean inclination toward emotional and spiritual realms, even escapism and fantasy, and Saturn's, you know, real world, material, practical, concrete concerns. These creative projects with the Venus involved may have a spiritual or emotional basis to them. This could also be a releasing of emotional baggage around our values and relationships, facing disillusionment around love and self-worth and ideals, and finding love, faith, and devotion in practical, real-world ways. You know, it's a time to commit to a vision and to set healthy boundaries within that vision and to work through any of the places that we're lying to ourselves or buying into a fantasy that we know is not going to stand the test of reality. So overall, Pisces lends this kind of watery, emotional, intuitive, imaginative vibe to this seeding cycle. So there's going to be an emotional element, there's going to be a creative element, and even maybe a divine element to the restructuring of our values and the separating the wheat from the chaff in terms of how we connect with other people, and really asking us to connect maybe more on a deeper, more emotional wavelength, or maybe we want to connect with people in a more spiritual or divine way, in a less superficial way. So these are kind of some of the themes that will present themselves in terms of the Piscean landscape. Now, as always, it's really important to consider, in light of these themes, the house placement in the area of your chart that this is being planted in, because that's the area of the chart where, you know, you're more likely to see these themes unfold, and the seed being planted there is going to be growing a tree, so to speak, again, in that area of your chart. So before I go through each rising sign and kind of tell you what area of life you should kind of look out for, or where this, you know, new cycle isn't being initiated for you, I wanted to quickly go over the timeline again of the Venus journey from Pisces into Aries, back into Pisces, conjunct Saturn again, and then direct, just to give you some of the themes that we'll see during that cycle so that you can apply those themes to the house area or the topics that I'm going to discuss in the rising sign portion. On the 18th, January 18th of this year, we will have Venus's second conjunction to Saturn in Pisces. The previous conjunction was middle to late March of 2024, I think around March 22nd, 21st. So this will be the second Venus conjunction in Pisces. And so that's kind of where this seed is planted. And then Venus will continue her journey through Pisces, where she'll end up conjoining Neptune on February 2nd. And this is kind of where, you know, the seed that we planted with Saturn Venus conjunction will kind of give birth to a dream or to a vision or to an ideal. Then Venus will continue her journey direct into Aries, which will kind of kindle a fire with our desires and our willingness and ability to connect with other people. And so while Venus is in Aries, she'll station retrograde around March 2nd, and then around March 11th, she'll conjoin Mercury, which had just made its way into Aries itself, and the conversation begins around these values and revisiting what we find meaningful and how we make meaningful connections. Then on the 22nd, we'll have Venus retrograde conjoining the Sun in Aries. This is the beginning of her this is kind of the halfway point of her synodic cycle, and she'll be Cazimi, which is this kind of renewal period. And so there's something that's rekindled or reignited during that period. Then on March 27th, Venus retrograde will move back into Pisces and conjoin Neptune again, where we revisit the dream or the vision that we had established the first time. Then Venus will continue its journey retrograde through Pisces, and then on April 7th, she'll conjoin Saturn again, where a new foundation may be revisited or reworked. And then shortly after that, on the 13th of April, she will station direct, almost directly on Saturn. I think it's like 1 or 2 degrees away. And this is kind of what, in the point, in my opinion, in the cycle where things are kind of cemented and, okay, you questioned, and you looked at your foundations in terms of values and relationships and creativity, and you went through this process of testing them out, thinking about it, reworking it, checking in with your vision, and you've come back to Saturn. Venus is stationing direct, and it's time to lay the foundation. You've triple checked, you've checked in with your soul, and it's like time to lay the concrete foundation so that you can move forward from a place that's stable and secure. And so from that point on, Venus will move back into Aries, and at this point Neptune is in Aries, so that dreamy vision that we had from Pisces is now having an Aries flare, and in my opinion this is kind of where our vision takes flight. So again, we've discussed in detail the conjunction of Venus and Saturn and what that is initiating. So then when Venus moves into Aries, that's obviously a very different vibe than Pisces. It's a fire sign, it's cardinal, it's ruled by Mars, it exalts the sun. It's definitely a different landscape than Pisces, but this is going to be a testing of those values and those commitments that you made at the conjunction in a more self-focused and bold way. You might take action, you might test the waters in terms of what you came up with at the conjunction. And this may lead to some tension and to conflicts as you navigate those. We think of Venus as relationships and, broadly speaking, platonic and otherwise, and we think of Aries as being a very individualistic sign. So if you've just reconsidered your values and what you find meaningful, and now you're testing the waters and you're taking action towards those values and really committing to those values, you might ruffle some feathers to people that might have been taking advantage of you or taking you for granted, or whose values don't align with your newfound assessment of your values. So this might bring up some tension and conflict, especially since Venus is in her detriment in Aries. It can be kind of hard to relate to other people when you're putting yourself first. And so just being mindful of that process while Venus is in Aries is important. Then Venus stations retrograde, and retrogrades are always about a reevaluation, a revisiting, a going back through and checking your notes and making sure your ducks are in a row. So now that you've maybe tested some of these themes that came up at the conjunction with a self-focused determination of Aries, when it turns retrograde, we're going to say, okay, well, we tested the waters. What worked? What didn't work? Where can I adjust? What is being reflected back at me that I like and don't like, and how can I fine tune some of the themes that I worked with from the conjunction that I tested out? And while Venus is in Aries, it's going to conjunct Mercury. So it's going to bring in some logic, some intellect, some communication during this process. Maybe even, verbal altercations or some kind of communication altercation. So be mindful of that as well. And then as Venus retrogrades back into Pisces, it's going to conjunct Neptune again. Again, Venus retrograde, revisiting, reevaluating. We're checking in with our dreams, with our ideals, with that imaginative vision that we have. And again, reevaluating that. Then Venus will conjunct Saturn, and that'll ask us for a deeper commitment. Now that we've, laid the groundwork for what we value and what we want to establish in our relationships or creative endeavors or our financial endeavors, we've came up with the big vision with the conjunction of Neptune. We went into Aries, we tested the waters, we put it into action. We made a conjunction with Mercury where we brought some logic, some intellect, maybe some, arguments and some tension by being in Aries. We've turned retrograde, we're reevaluating, we've checked in with our dream, we've conjunct Saturn again. We're ready to, make a firm decision, to crystallize. It's a moment of crystallization. It's a moment of redefinition of relationships, making sturdier commitments to our values, whether that's financially, creatively, or relationally. It's a time to get more aligned with your spiritual, emotional truths before Venus will station direct and leave Pisces, and then eventually Saturn leaves Pisces too. And so with the retrograde, old patterns and unresolved issues are going to surface and to test us with that, re-establishment of our values and what we find meaningful. But ultimately, this is a return to reflect and to mature and to commit and to create a firm grounding and understanding for the new cycle to take place. So let's get into the houses that this will be happening in for you. I'm going to go by rising sign and describe for each rising sign what themes and what areas of life this conjunction will be initiating or seeding a new moment and a new cycle for you. Now, most horoscopes start with Aries Rising. I didn't do it that way this time. I'm actually starting with Pisces because that's where this is happening, and I wanted to start with the first house. And then we're going to work in reverse order. So sorry, Aries, I know you like to be first, but you're going to be last on this one. So let's start with Pisces Rising. So for Pisces Rising, this will be happening in your first house. In ancient astrology, the first house was really the main house that represented you as the native. It represents yourself, your identity, and your appearance, your body, and your health. So this could be a new cycle in how you define yourself in terms of your values and the boundaries that you place and how you relate to other people. There could be a refinement or beautification or a reestablishment of how you adorn yourself in terms of your appearance, and you may embody a more graceful or mature kind of nature. It's a time to redefine your sense of self in a more grounded and disciplined way. You may feel a strong need to refine your style, your demeanor, your approach to relationships, aiming for authenticity and something that aligns with your inner values. And as Venus is the ruler of your third house, there can be, a sense of how you communicate in your mindset, in your immediate environment that, plays into this. There may be a maturity in how you think and how you speak and you relate to those around you. And there might be practical shifts in how you communicate that and the style of your communication. And you may also feel the need to express your values more clearly. And with Venus also ruling your eighth house, there could be a period of restructuring your relationships in terms of shared resources, emotional bonds, intimacy, trust, and vulnerability. You might confront fears around insecurities related to intimacy and how that affects your relationships, and maybe try to create a more balanced and equitable dynamic in terms of, shared finances and shared resources. There may be also a need to redefine and make stronger boundaries around those financial or emotional partnerships. For my Aquarius risings, this Venus-Saturn conjunction is happening in your second house of finances, values, resources, possessions. So this is a new cycle around material stability and maybe even aligning your values with your long-term financial goals, or even in a broader sense, cultivating a sense of self-worth. This may be a time of greater financial responsibility and aligning your spending habits and your allocation of resources in a way that's more in alignment with what you value. There can be a refinement in how you manage these resources. And as Saturn emphasizes these, long-term disciplined planning, and Venus is encouraging harmony and beauty, they may be asking for a serious evaluation of your relationship with money and your personal priorities. Because Venus rules your fourth house and your seventh house, this can bring up themes of home and family with the fourth house being involved. There could be a need for financial responsibility or a realignment of financial values in terms of your home or family responsibilities, or looking at how your monetary values are a reflection perhaps of how you grew up and what your parents and family taught. This may be a time to create a home environment that, maybe you're spending money on beautifying your home to create a space that more aligns with what you want in a home. Or you could be purchasing a property or repairing a home or renovating a home or supporting family members during this time. And with Venus also ruling your seventh house of partnerships and marriage and contracts, there might be, themes of shared values and agreements in your relationships. You might be, renegotiating or redefining your finances in terms of your relationships and in terms of your partner, or evaluating how your partner supports you and vice versa, and how that's a reflection of your values and your self-worth. And this may encourage building a stronger, more sustainable connection and grounding your relationships in something that is mutual and has a shared priority and a equitable kind of give and take relationship. So for my Capricorn risings, this is happening in your third house of immediate environment and communication. So the Venus-Saturn conjunction in your third house may signify a time that requires serious reflection on how you express yourself and the quality of the interactions that you have with others in your immediate environment. Venus brings grace and harmony, and Saturn insists on discipline and depth. So a refinement of your communication style and maybe even focusing on a meaningful learning or teaching, and building long-term intellectual or relational connections, especially in the places that you go day to day. This could be, adopting a more thoughtful or measured approach to how you talk and how you communicate your ideas. This could be a strengthening of the relationships with your siblings or your relatives or your neighbors, or a commitment to learning new skills that are more in alignment with your values. And with Venus ruling your fifth house and your 10th house, this can bring in themes of creativity, self-expression, romance, pleasures, and joy with the fifth house. And so you might feel inspired to express these through creative writing or sharing your ideas in a way that's creative and pleasurable, with an emphasis, because Saturn is there, with something that is long-lasting and meaningful. And because the fifth house can also deal with romance, you may find yourself in romantic relationships that are a little bit more serious or require serious conversations or decisions to be made, particularly in terms of shared goals or intellectual compatibility. And with Venus also ruling your 10th house, this is going to bring in potential themes of your career, your reputation, your legacy, and public image. And so it may involve rethinking how you communicate in your work settings or how you present yourself in the public space. You may need to refine kind of your mission in your career or how you're messaging, maybe updating a resume or, working on your public speaking skills, or creating things that align with your long-term career goals. And this can even lead to collaborations or partnerships in your career that take on a more serious, structured, or committed tone that are based on shared values and requires kind of a sense of clear communication. So that's kind of what I would expect for my Capricorn risings. So for my Sagittarius risings, this is occurring in your fourth house of home, family, your roots, your emotional foundations, and your inner sense of security. And it can suggest a significant period of reassessment and commitment in these areas, particularly aligned with your values. Saturn brings discipline, responsibility, Venus adds harmony and a focus on relationships, and being in the fourth house, this is making, reevaluating your foundations in your emotional realms in terms of your home and your family relationships, and maybe shifting to something that is, more emotionally stable and has some long-term value to it. You may be creating a more harmonious or beautiful environment in your home. You may be redecorating or nesting or getting rid of things that no longer make you feel safe and secure, or have maybe become too comfortable and too rigid, and freshening up your space. This could be a reassessment of your relationships with your family members or your parents, or you know addressing unresolved underlying emotional issues, or just more broadly building a deeper sense of inner security by aligning your personal values with your home and your emotional life. Because Venus is ruler of your sixth house, this could bring in themes of health and illness, daily routines, and acts of service or servitude, or the duties and obligations that we have. And so this is kind of connected to the practical responsibilities of your life. You might feel inspired to improve your daily habits around your home and family and create a more nurturing and supportive environment for that, just like organizing your space and maybe even adopting healthier routines. And this could involve, balancing your everyday workload with your home and family obligations and making sure that neither of those are being neglected. With Venus ruling your 11th house of friendships, social networks, aspirations, and alliances, this is linking it to those realms as well. And so you may reconsider how your connections and your alliances are in alignment with your long-term goals and aspirations, and with your home life and your emotional foundations. And this may bring about a desire to align those social relationships and group affiliations with your personal values and your sense of security. For my Scorpio risings, this is happening in your fifth house. And the fifth house governs things like creativity, pleasure, what brings us joy, romance, and how you express your authentic self. It's the things that we do to have fun. And the Venus-Saturn conjunction here suggests a time of reassessing and committing to what truly brings you fulfillment and what truly brings you joy and pleasure. Saturn brings a maturity and a wisdom, while Venus infuses it with harmony and balance. And so this calls for a thoughtful, grounded approach to the matters of your heart, your creative endeavors, and your pursuit of pleasure. You might take a more serious approach to those creative endeavors or projects or hobbies, and focusing on the quality of those rather than the quantity, and focusing on the longevity of your pleasurable experiences and fun over the fleeting kind of spontaneity, not lasting experiences. This may be a time of reevaluating your romantic relationships and seeking connections that are, more meaningful and more grounded and more mature. And this could ask you to reflect on your relationship with pleasure and consider whether or not your current sources of joy and fun are sustainable and are truly fulfilling, or are they just meeting a short-term need? With Venus ruling your seventh house of relationships and your 12th house of solitude, hidden matters, self-undoing, those types of things, there could be, a need to align your personal expression in your romantic life with something deeper and more reflective of your values. You may reevaluate whether your current partnerships are supporting your ability to express yourself authentically and to have fun and to have joy. This could also manifest as an important relationship becoming more serious, or romantic connection becoming more stable. And for those of you that have children, the fifth house can rule children. So these themes might come up with your children. A need to be more responsible with your children. A need to bring more, of a creative, structured element to how you parent. And is your parenting style in alignment with your values and the values that you want to instill with your children? And with Venus also ruling the 12th house for you, this could bring an introspective kind of reflective tone to this transit. And you might explore deeper, more subconscious influences, around those themes. And it could signify a need to balance your public expressions of joy and fun and connection with more private moments of introspection. Like, where are we overdoing the pleasure? Where are we overdoing the fun? And where can we kind of reel that in and act from a place that's more in alignment with what we really want, and it's not doing it just to meet this short-term, gratuitous kind of pleasure-seeking impulse, and we're actually doing things out of pleasure that fulfill us and bring us ultimate joy. My Libra risings, this conjunction is happening in your sixth house of responsibility, of health, vitality, servitude, obligation. It's the house associated with the work that is done out of necessity rather than choice. And so the Venus-Saturn conjunction here indicates a new cycle of responsibility or refinement in how you handle the daily burdens, any health challenges, and any acts of service that you perform. Saturn's influence emphasizes discipline and accountability, and Venus seeks to bring balance and harmony to this otherwise challenging area. So this could signify a commitment to managing your health and well-being in a more disciplined and realistic approach, especially since the Venus rules your first house of self and body and health as well. Finding ways to create harmony and balance within your daily routines or any work that feels, burdensome or unfulfilling or laborious. This could even signify a sense of duty towards others, especially in terms of taking on caretaking roles or a focus on, serving others in a way that's sustainable and responsible. Again, with Venus ruling your first house and this conjunction happening in the sixth house, this could suggest that your identity and sense of well-being are directly tied to how you manage those demands in the sixth house. So there could be, again, a heightened awareness around how you navigate the daily habits and your routines and how they impact your personal health or your identity and how you present yourself. This could point to a need to refine, your approach to your service and your labor to making sure that it aligns with your values and it isn't taking a toll on your health and your well-being. Navigating any kind of, physical challenges with patience and care and building long-term sustainability. Venus also rules your eighth house of shared resources, debts, intimacy, and kind of the inner shadowy psychological realm. And so this could lead to, financial and material obligations that are tied to others that require careful management or renegotiation. You could face challenges in your partnerships, particularly regarding around how shared burdens or responsibilities, maybe in terms of finances, are handled. And this could lead to an exploration of the connection between your physical health and your emotional health and your psychological health, and particularly how they relate to themes of dependency, shared commitment, and your daily work. For Virgo rising, this is happening in the seventh house that traditionally is related to marriage, partnerships, one-on-one relationships, business partnerships, and open enemies. A conjunction here with Venus and Saturn can suggest a serious, grounded assessment of those dynamics, and maybe even an encouragement or fostering of deeper, more committed relationships or agreements. This can highlight themes of solidifying commitments, whether those are romantic or business or legal partnerships. You could be reassessing the qualities and fairness of your relationships and whether or not they align with your values and your sense of self-worth, ensuring that they do align long-term with what you're seeking. You could be addressing imbalances or obligation within your partnerships and maybe, having a focus on creating sustainable and mutually beneficial connections, making sure that you're not being taken advantage of or that you're not taking advantage of other people. Ultimately, this can manifest as a deepening of an existing relationship or the end of relationships that no longer align with your values or your growth. And so this may need or require serious conversations, or expectations or a discussion of plans for the future with those partnerships. Now, because Venus rules your second house of resources, values, finances, and possessions, then that will kind of be weaved into this transit as well. So those discussions may center around shared finances or the role of money and resources within your partnerships, or evaluating whether or not your relationships are enhancing or taking away from your sense of self-worth or your material security. And you could be reconsidering investments or agreements that affect both you and your personal assets, but also your shared assets and the assets that are tied up with your partner as well. And with Venus also ruling your ninth house of, your beliefs and your higher ideals and travel and philosophy, this could suggest that, these belief systems and long-term visions are being influenced by this transit. And you may be aligning with partners who share your broader ideals and your broader worldview. And you may be exploring how your personal relationships connect to your spiritual and intellectual growth. Like, how does your worldview impact the relationships that you get into? And how do the relationships that you surround yourself with impact how you see the world? And there could be some serious considerations about maybe even long-term or long-distance relationships, travel plans that are solidified around creativity and what you value and growth, or commitments involving, continuing your education, or even some kind of legal matters or legal process. My Leo risings, this conjunction will be happening in your 8th house of shared finances, debts, inheritances, and deep transformative psychological experiences, intimacy. And so the Venus-Saturn conjunction here calls for a serious and disciplined approach to those areas that encourage maturity, responsibility, and a focus on long-term stability. And Venus is seeking balance and harmony and fairness within these shared commitments, and Saturn is asking for accountability and boundaries. And so this might mean taking responsibility for shared financial matters such as debts or taxes or investments, reevaluating your intimate relationships and how you trust and how you show up vulnerably, and the power that's shared between two people in those intimate spaces, and facing deep kind of psychological experiences that require you to reassess what you value and how you handle those joint resources and those deep emotional entanglements. It might feel particularly heavy for you, but it offers a potential to build lasting stability and clarity in the matters of any shared commitment or emotional bonds that you might have. With Venus ruling your 3rd house of communication and local environment and siblings, this is going to kind of come into play. You might have serious conversations about shared financial obligations or intimate relationships with the people in your environment or your siblings. You might resolve long-standing issues with any kind of neighbors or even siblings or relatives in your life that involve shared resources or mutual responsibilities. You could refine your communication style so that it brings more clarity and balance and honesty to your discussions about emotional vulnerability or financially charged topics. So those just some of the themes from the 8th house and the 3rd house. And then Venus also rules your 10th house of career, reputation, legacy, public image. So this will be tied into your 10th house as well. And so this might mean navigating shared financial responsibilities in the professional partnerships or in the public realm. Considering how your public image or career ambitions are impacted by financial interdependence or shared resources, or the 8th house traditionally was called the esteem of others. Like, how do others see you, and how do others view the resources that you bring to the table in a public or professional setting? And you might find yourself facing transformative shifts in your career or public role that require you to balance those financial obligations with your long-term professional goals. This is happening for my Cancer risings in the 9th house. The 9th house governs things like philosophy, religion, higher education, long distance travel. It's the pursuit of wisdom. It's the experiences and the impulse to want to broaden our horizons and to, have a big picture view of the world. And so we might find a reevaluation of our belief systems or philosophical outlook during this time. We might be focusing on what aligns, philosophically and in terms of our beliefs and our religions with something that aligns more with our values and something that provides lasting meaning. We might find a more disciplined approach to learning. We may take on a new, endeavor in terms of continuing our education or starting an education program of some sort. It's something that, spurs a intellectual or spiritual growth. This could offer a time to be reflective on, travel and the role that travel plays in your life and connections with distant places. And, when we travel, we often, encounter cultures and experiences that change our worldview. And so creating or, coming up with a trip that is in alignment with your values and what you want to, do in the world could be very fruitful during this time. And with Venus ruling your 4th house of home and family and emotional security, those themes will be wrapped into that 9th house conjunction. So you might be reflecting on how your upbringing or your family life reflects and has shaped your worldview and your belief systems. You might be considering how your pursuit of higher education or travel aligns with your desire for emotional security and a stable home life. Can you create a stable home base and go out and travel into the world? How can you broaden your horizons while also keeping a steady foundation in your home life? There might be a need to harmonize your sense of inner security with your ambitions for intellectual and spiritual and philosophical expansion, or the thirst for new experiences. And with Venus ruling your 11th house as well as friendships, alliances, and long-term aspirations, this connects your higher ideals and your belief systems with your social groups or your group affiliations. So you might be reevaluating on how your social circles and who you affiliate with shapes your worldview and vice versa, and are they aligning with your personal values and your philosophical outlook? You might be setting long-term goals in terms of education or personal growth or travel that support your community or larger aspirations in the world. And it's a time to consider how your friendships or networks influence your pursuit of wisdom, your spiritual alignment, and your intellectual growth. Gemini Rising, this is happening in your 10th house of career, public life, reputation, and your standing in the world. And so this might bring up themes of building or refining your career to align with your core values and your long-term aspirations. You may be taking on more responsibility for your public image, ensuring that it reflects the integrity and the authenticity that you want to project. This could even indicate a strengthening of professional relationships, particularly maybe with mentors or collaboratives or authority figures that you trust through mutual respect. This could mean doubling down on a commitment through a creative endeavor for your work, or just ultimately aligning, what are if Venus's values, aligning your values with what you're doing out in the world in a way that's, promoting long-term sustainability. Now, for Gemini risings, Venus also rules your 5th house of creativity, joy, romance, children, self-expression. So a creative project or artistic pursuit may gain recognition or require greater commitment, for instance. You might be integrating more joy and more fun, more authenticity into your career by aligning it with your goals and your creative passions. There might be an infusion of children into your career and public life somehow, or a need to balance children and your public life. You might need to consider how romantic and recreational activities might influence your public image, for better or for worse, and your professional responsibilities. Venus also rules your 12th house of hidden matters, solitude, spiritual growth. And so your public life might be influenced by a deeper, more introspective work during this time. So reflecting on how your subconscious patterns or your self-sabotaging or your hidden fears influence your career decisions or your public image. What's holding you back? What fears are keeping you from embodying the reputation that you want to have out in the world? Seeking a sense of spiritual alignment in your professional life, ensuring that your, inner values are resonating with your outward achievements and what you're producing. And there might be a need for balancing, the outward ambition and private reflection to avoid burnout. This might be a need to balance some self-care and some, rest so that you can show up in the world in a way that's more authentic and productive, and you're not like tired and just kind of pushing through. For my Taurus risings, this is happening in your 11th house of friendships, alliances, aspirations, social networks, and this will emphasize a need to evaluate and strengthen these areas and prioritize relationships and ambitions that align with your core values. You could be reevaluating your social circle to make sure that your friendships and the people that you're associating with are supportive, and that they are meaningful connections, and that they are aligned with what you want to do and your long-term goals. You may take on a leadership position or more responsibility within a group or a community. You might be committing to long-term aspirations, focusing on practical steps to make your dream a reality, so to speak. This is a time that encourages you to prioritize quality over quantity in terms of your social and professional networks, to seek relationships that offer a mutual beneficial growth. For you, Venus rules your 1st house of self, physical appearance, and identity, and your sixth house of daily work, health, and duties and service. And so for you, you might be considering how your involvement in groups and communities reflects your personal values and contributes to your identity and your sense of self. You might be using your natural charm as a Taurus rising to, strengthen your alliances or foster meaningful collaborations. And you might be aligning your long-term aspirations and your hopes and your wishes with your more authentic self, ensuring that they're true to who you are and they're aligned with your values. And with Venus ruling your sixth house, you might be collaborating with others, on day-to-day projects or, tasks that are more mundane and of the nature that, is a little bit more drudgery and a little bit more kind of chop wood, carry water. You might be finding yourself needing to balance the demands of your daily responsibilities with your participation in, your social groups, or even balancing your daily activities with your hopes and your aspirations. Like how can you align your daily routines and the daily work that you do with your broader goals and what you're trying to achieve. And this may be a time too when you're ensuring that your health and well-being are supported as you commit to those aspirations so that you can fulfill them in a way that is healthy and productive. Last, but certainly not least, ever, we have our Aries risings. This is happening in your 12th house, and traditionally the 12th house was a difficult place. It ruled things like hidden enemies, isolation, sorrows, self-undoing, and so it can impact the hidden or unseen factors of our relationships, our resources, or our self-worth. So with this happening in the 12th house, you might be confronting hidden patterns or self-sabotaging behaviors that come up in your relationships or your finances. This is a good time to reflect on how isolation, withdrawal, or separation may serve as a necessary period so that you can heal and reevaluate kind of what you find meaningful and what you find valuable. This could even mean taking a mature and disciplined approach to healing unresolved emotional burdens or challenges tied to relationships or shared resources. So this will be a time where you consider hidden dynamics, both internally and externally, and how they affect your ability to experience harmony and stability in your life. And Venus also rules your second house of finance, possessions, and resources. And so this might be reflecting on how subconscious beliefs or hidden habits impact your financial decisions or your self-worth. You might be reassessing, your attachment to possessions or resources, especially if they're tied to your feelings of security or control. And you might be letting go of unhealthy financial dependencies or investments that no longer align with your long-term stability and commitments. Venus also rules your seventh house of marriage, partnerships, and commitments. And so you might be exploring how, unseen tensions influence your partnerships, or reflecting on unspoken fears or subconscious patterns that create challenges in your one-on-one relationships, and considering whether or not your current relationship or partnership is built on mutual respect and aligned values, or is it being undermined by secrecy and imbalance. And so a lot of subconscious stuff coming up for Aries rising. Ultimately, it's getting you to see how you're sabotaging, or maybe what unseen influences in your mind psychologically and in your patterns are undermining some of the places in your life, such as relationships and finances, and how can we recommit to, values that are more in alignment with a productive and healthy expression of those themes. So now that we've went through all the rising signs, you should have an idea. We went over the broad basic understanding of the Venus-Saturn conjunction, what it means, and then the breakdown house by house will hopefully give you a more nuanced and individual understanding of how this conjunction might play out for you. Now, I do want to say that when we're dealing with archetypes, I'm not going to be able to touch on every single possible manifestation. That's like infinite. But what I can do is kind of give you an idea of the energies at play in the field of experiences where they're unfolding so that you can kind of draw your own conclusions. I'm not here to, predict exactly what's going to happen for you necessarily, but I will give you the astrological weather, so to speak. Like, the themes that are going to be coming up and the areas that they'll be coming up in and how they manifest will be dependent on everybody's individual life and individual personality and the free will, that we have in order to navigate those experiences. So I just wanted to give you guys a general overview of like this process with Venus, because I think it's really important, especially in terms of our values and what we're establishing and committing to in terms of those values, and how those values are reflective of the relationships that we build and the creative endeavors that we go through and the pleasures that we pursue. And so I hope you got something out of this. Comment below on what house this is hitting for you and if this resonates for you. If you like this more long form content, let me know that too. I know it's kind of long, but I enjoyed putting it together and I like explaining these and exploring these themes. And I hope it kind of brought some kind of clarity or insight for you to at least go forward and kind of reflect a little bit. So until next time, I'll see you later.